Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Vishwapani. I'm one of the founders of Mindfulness Wales, and some of the people you see along the top are fellow trustees, and we exist just to support the development of mindfulness in Wales specifically. But I know that many of you are here who aren't Welsh, and that's all right as well. We're very pleased to have Katherine Weare, Professor Katherine Weare, with us today, and to talk about to reflect on really the future of mindfulness in schools, specifically in relation to the findings of the Myriad report, which recently the results were publicized. And it's great to have some people with us who've been very involved with that process. So welcome to Liz from Oxford Mindfulness Centre. Did I say that right? And Richard Burnett, who is, I think, the founder the co-founder of the Mindfulness in Schools project. Welcome also to Ben Chalwin, and you can see who's at the top, and you can see the MISP logo behind him, who's the head of training at MISP. And so Katherine is, so the Myriad project, as Katherine will explain, was a very large project looking at mindfulness in schools, run by a number of academic institutions. The curriculum they used was a Mindfulness in Schools project. And we've invited Katherine as someone who's a respected expert in the field of mindfulness in schools, who was neither involved with the Myriad project nor with mindfulness in schools. And we'll just to share her perspective. And really what we're hoping is that this session will be helpful for people in the field who are wanting to know about how to take mindfulness forward, or what those findings, which at least as reported, were not favorable, and what that means for the field. It was a very big project. I remember in 2014, I think it was, 2016, whenever it started, it was a few years ago. It was amazing that this really large project was being funded, and a lot of excitement about that. So where are we now at the end of that process? What are the lessons as we look forward? So we're going to have a period of meditation, and I've asked Ben to lead that. So hopefully he'll give us a little taste of what happens in schools. Ben was a former teacher himself. Are you a current teacher in a school, Ben?
Not in a school, no.
No, all right.
Not anymore.
Okay. But you've been in the classroom, and you're now very involved in the field. So can we spotlight Ben? Maybe I can do that.
So I can spotlight myself.
Okay. Thank you. Lovely.
Which is an unusual phrase to start a practice with. I'm just going to mute everybody apart from me, just in case there's any sound bouncing around. Yeah, so I thought I'd offer up a practice called a Fothbok, which I know a lot of people on the screen are familiar with, but it means feet on floor and body on chair. Or if you want to be slightly more risque, bottom on chair, or even more risque derivatives. But as we might say to the children and the young people, maybe starting by coming to sit well, whatever that might mean to us in this moment. And eyes closed or eyes open being a choice. And if we are choosing to keep eyes open, maybe letting the gaze rest somewhere other than straight on the screen. So maybe below the screen, beyond the screen. And sometimes we might invite young people to tune into any kind of wobbliness that might be around in this moment. So there might be wobbles around for us as adults, but maybe just a gentle noting of what's around for us in our experience right now. Whether that's thoughts about the evening or sense of emotion or mood. Maybe something we feel like doing, a sense of action, of urge. Maybe something in the body. And then how would it be to really invite a settling of attention into the lower part of the body? Maybe just beginning with the feet, maybe on the floor, maybe not. The body mainly, maybe on a chair, maybe not, but just those contact points of the feet and the seat. What's here? What are we noticing? And then maybe getting really curious about the feet, like a torchlight being focused. Maybe the bottom of the feet, the sides, the top. And then again, a bit like a torchlight, but a beam expanding, maybe expanding that to include the ankles. The lower legs. The knees. The upper legs. And sensations of sitting. Feet on the floor and the body on the chair, the cushion. Within that, if we choose, we might even notice the breath just moving, maybe in the abdomen, maybe somewhere else. And from there, bring attention now to the whole of the body. The whole of the body right now, sitting here. And as we transition out from practice, often say this to young people, maybe giving fingers and toes a bit of a wriggle, just to get a sense of the rest of the body, and allowing eyes to open if they've been closed. I can see Katherine having a big old stretch, so if that feels welcome, by all means having a bit of a stretch. But thank you. I'll remove the spotlight now, but I might stay large on the screen unless you go back to gallery view. Thank you. Sorry, Vishnu, I probably muted you as well, and I muted all that.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, it was good to get a little bit of a taste of the classroom there and that environment, because that's what we're concerned about. So I'll introduce Katherine now. I've known Katherine. I've been getting to know Katherine through the Mindfulness Initiative, where we're both involved, and Katherine has been the education lead for the Mindfulness Initiative. But she has a long history in this field, and in a way, it's even before her engagement with mindfulness, she's someone who's really pioneered, and as an expert, as an academic, as a researcher, the whole principle that we need to attend to the well-being of young people, and that's part of the business of schools, raising the question of how to do that. And she's one of the pioneers of social and emotional learning, I believe, and then also reflecting on the whole question of how do you do that well, and can you do it at scale? Because when we're talking about education, we're talking about an education system. And all of this is very relevant to Myriad. So I'm very, very pleased that Katherine's been able to join us. I'm going to hand over now. Spotlight Katherine.
Katherine, wow. I'll share my screen.
Over to you.
I'll share my screen in a moment, but just to say a little bit about myself to begin with. I was, like Ben, I was a teacher. I was a school teacher for some time, teacher of drama, very useful. So I'm coming from that educational background. And the other area that I've always been very interested in and pioneered work in is what you might call a whole school joined up systems type approach. So this relationship between the individual in the classroom, in the school system, and how it all needs to work together. So that's something that I've been bringing to this work. And something that struck me in the work on mindfulness is how much the principles that we're discovering through activities like the Myriad program reinforce so many of the long-term messages that I've been talking about all my life. Okay, I'll have a go at sharing screen. I might take a minute to get this organized. It never quite seems to work. Share. There we go. Can folks see my slides? So is that working? Can people see? I'm seeing thumbs coming up. Okay. So what I'm hoping to do just for the next 20-25 minutes is to rattle through some thoughts around Myriad, and particularly though to catalyse a discussion between us on what between us we feel it might teach us. So I may be saying things that are factual and descriptive, or I may say things that are a bit controversial, but none of this is supposed to be the gospel truth. It's really just meant to be an impulse for all of us to have a good discussion. So I'm not really presenting myself as the expert on this. We've all been able to read the papers. We've all had responses to this. So I'm, in a sense, catalysing a discussion. And I'm doing it partly as lead for mindfulness in education in the Mindfulness Initiative, where my colleague and boss Ruth and I wrote some guidance on this issue, but also, as Bishop Palmy said, in my role as independent expert. But I would say on that, although I didn't work on Myriad, and I don't work for this, I have been very involved in both approaches. It's a small world, mindfulness, and one knows all these folks and has done different things with them at different times. So I'll try and offend everyone equally, I think, if that's okay. And I'll tell you a little bit how I was involved with Myriad just before it started as we go. Okay, so I'm sure we're all aware of these kind of headlines that came out a couple of days after, back in July, about which really focused on the finding about whether the Myriad program had shown that the mindfulness lessons were helpful for mental well-being or not. All the other findings, which we'll talk about later as well, got lost in this barrage, really. They like the simple stuff. And it even made it to New Scientist, some very crude, simple messages that didn't reflect the whole nuance of the findings. But I did a little study today, which was quite fun, and discovered that the media have got very short memories. And only 8 days ago, this was a headline in the Daily Mail, which is going back to saying, oh yes, my meditation lessons should be part of the national curriculum. So I think we can take relief from that and say we've got a bit of room to breathe. This stuff moves on, it's yesterday's papers. That isn't to say that it doesn't impact on the world we're in. And I guess a question for you, and I will, by the way, be raising questions as we go that may trigger something in your thinking. So I'm not just going to barrage at you, but a question we might discuss really is what's been the impact of the Myriad results, where you are in the world that you work in with your colleagues or whatever. Interesting question, I think. Okay, now myself and Ruth Ormston wrote a paper which has been gone around quite many places on our own initial reflections on the results of the large RCT of mindfulness in schools. And you'll find that online, it's free, which is nice. And there is starting to come some more nuanced articles now. One came out recently in Mindfulness, Let's Unpack the Findings of Myriad, and Richard Burnett, I know, was one of the people who was interviewed, as was Willem Kuyken and Mark Greenberg. So there's some reflections and more nuanced thinking already coming out about this. So that's good, I think, not so much knee-jerk stuff. Now, just in case you don't know, as Vishyapani said, just to very quickly grasp what mindfulness, what Myriad was, it was a very high profile, very large RCT of mindfulness as an intervention, as a 10-week thing. And it cost a lot of money, £6 million over 7 years, mainly based on the RCT, not only, funded by a large medical foundation, which I think is interesting that was the funder of it. And its main outcome, that actually the only one Wellcome wanted in the first place, was did it prevent depression? And the team had to argue hard for any secondary outcomes at all. So that's quite interesting. It used a 10-session intervention, .B, which was written by the Mindfulness in Schools project and was the best known, best evidenced work in the field at the time. And a question I've got for all of us, I guess, is this the most appropriate model for assessing mindfulness? Is a kind of RCT, medical type approach, intervention, outcomes, focus on mental health, depression, is that all we want to do? Or did that in a sense in itself skew what we're looking at, is a question we might think about. Okay, so what was the Myriad RCT? Well, I'm going to pop through this quickly. It was a very large RCT, 84 schools, over 8,000 students, and the schools represented quite a spectrum of schools in the UK and were randomised. And the control was teaching as usual, which was PSHE, which they called social and emotional learning, so Americans would read the papers as well and understand what we meant. Now, I think it's interesting that schools, and important that schools were only eligible if they had not previously taught mindfulness at all. And teachers were only eligible if they had no previous mindfulness training. And again, another question I've got is, given this was not how the .B programme was usually implemented, or how any mindfulness in schools programmes are usually implemented, usually teachers and schools self-select and they're interested and they've got some background there. It's not usually kind of put on them from above. What impact did that have is an interesting question. And is it fair to be assessing a programme that was usually taught in one way and with one type of participant by looking at different ones? This is an interesting question, particularly if they're not interested. Would you do a trial of the teaching of French with people who've shown no interest in modern foreign languages before? Is an interesting question. I'm not saying there's an answer to it. And the reason, of course, one understands, and I do understand as a researcher myself, the need for a very clean slate here, the need to try to keep a very level playing field. So there's good research reasons why this was done. But it does raise the question of how does the research tail start to wag the implementation dog if we're not careful? What's the impact of that? So that's the question I have. Now, the intervention chosen had the strongest evidence base in the UK, and Willem Kuyken and I and others, Willem was the lead on the Myriad programme, had already done a small control trial of the .B programme in quite a particular way with 9 of the very best teachers and with 14, 15-year-olds, 522 of them. And it showed reasonable results on depression, anxiety and stress. And that was kept up over 3 months later. So there was a good reason to pick this programme. And we had done a feasibility study on it. So that was why it was chosen. Now, that was the point at which I was no longer involved in Myriad, but I was involved up to that point. Now, and I think there's been a continuing, can everybody see the slides, by the way, Vishyapani, or are they? No, I can't, yes. I can't see them very well, but as long as everyone else can, that's all right. I think there's a continuing tension between two views of what Myriad was doing. Was it a rigorous trial of whether it's possible to roll out and scale up a reasonably successful programme? Or, as it was sometimes presented and keeps being presented, was it the definitive test of universal approaches to school-based mindfulness training in its entirety? Is it the acid test against which we measure everything? And I think the papers, as I see them, keep moving between those two. And I keep hearing different versions of it. Personally, I'd hoped it was going to be the first one because I felt that was the fair thing to do. And I think that's an interesting question. Is it fair to generalize so much? Obviously, it's a huge trial. Obviously, it's a very important trial. Obviously, it gives us lots of information. But I think that's a question we should be asking ourselves. What do you think about that? Now, our previous systematic reviews had cautiously positive results for students, and I've spent a lifetime reviewing the evidence around this, around things such as mental health and well-being, social emotional skills and performance and cognition and learning. So when you look at, there's about 15 reviews and 5 meta-analyses last time I looked. It keeps increasing all the time. That's roughly speaking the picture we were coming from. And Myriad itself did several meta-analyses, and the last one they did examined 66 randomized control trials, and they concluded that mindfulness-based programs continue to improve mindfulness and symptoms of anxiety, but no longer depression. Oops, you're just about to measure that. And to improve cognitive skills. So they were going into this with a reasonable expectation that they would find some positive results, which I think is, again, is important to remember. But as we've seen, they showed no significant impact on the mental health of most students compared with, I won't read it off the screen, I assume you'll read, social and emotional learning as usual. But there was some evidence that mindfulness training was better value than standard social and emotional teaching. So that's been the finding that's in everyone's mind, and Bishop Harney said it wasn't very positive. And there was actually lots of other very positive findings that we need to remember, but this is the headline one. But just a slightly facetious thought is this quite such an alarming finding? And maybe existing PSHE is quite good, you know, if it's been taught well. So it's not necessarily, you know, a lot of control trials of mindfulness don't compare it with something active that's in the same field, which PSHE is. They compare it with something like reading or something like that. So, you know, it was quite a tough trial, really. So I just think that's important to remember what it was being compared with. And the main way they explained this, which they said was unexpected, was the lack of student engagement. They said for the most part, young people didn't engage. Those that did, and this is a very common finding, reported better mental health and better skills. So those that did it. But the majority didn't do the required mindfulness practice homework. And if you look deeper into the findings, it was a bit Marmite. Some students loved it, some hated it, and there wasn't a lot in the middle. What struck me as somebody who's been reviewing this field for a long time, including the results of .B, is that this isn't in any way in line with the usual acceptability rates for school-based mindfulness training, which is usually 7 or 8 out of 10, but nearly all the programs I've ever looked at, including .B. And I think that's quite interesting. And I know it surprised the people who developed .B quite a lot to see all these findings coming back. And I think that needs looking at. This really was quite skewed, really. So what I think we're concluding, this is partly what Myriad's concluded, and we already, by the way, had been writing a lot of guidance about mindfulness in school. So there's a lot of background there, with a lot had happened in that 7 years. So we'd already come to a lot of conclusions, and which Myriad actually agrees with. And I know, in fact, so does the Mindfulness in Schools project, that mindfulness with young people needs to be based on relationships, invitational, not imposed on people. It needs to be, it can't just be taught as an intervention in which you go in blind and teach it like it doesn't matter who you are or who they are. So it does need to be based on strong relationships. And it really does need to be fun, engaging and relevant. And Myriad has quite a lot to say about this, about how we need to start where young people are, find out what they're doing already. And I know, again, this work hard on that. Major findings around the fact that it doesn't fit all, that it may not be indicated for some students, and particularly concerns about trauma and whether seated meditation with your eyes shut is the only possible way to teach young people that, which of course, again, the programme itself does not just teach that. But maybe that was some of the ways in which it has got across to students. But broadly speaking, I think the Myriad project programme found some very interesting, made some very interesting suggestions on what mindfulness in schools needs to be. And my question to you guys is, what do you think? And what else would you say about how we teach this? Very important finding, I think, is that all previous research suggests that mindfulness in schools needs to start with their staff. Because unless you apply the oxygen mask first, you won't care enough about other people and you won't be competent to do that. It needs to start where teachers are, who are busy and under pressure. And I've been teaching this at my local secondary school, and it's quite a challenge to engage them at 3:45 after a long day when they're turning up in a school classroom. And it really does need to say, what is our teachers' understanding of this? And I think all the previous research has come to the conclusion that this must start with the staff. And it was quite gratifying, therefore, that that's rather what Weare concluded. And a very positive finding is that this mindfulness may not have been fantastic for the young people, but it did work for the teachers themselves, which I think is really an important finding. And it's a huge shame it hasn't come out more strongly. They had lower levels of burnout, according to the Myriad team. And Mark Greenberg, who is the very eminent scientific advisor to Myriad, concluded that this is one area in education in which mindfulness has repeatedly been shown to be successful. And he suggests that this is where we ought to start. And I think that's a really important finding for the whole field, which Myriad has shown very clearly. And what we also found, we keep finding this, and again, Myriad found this in a paper that one of their researchers, definitely Weare, found out, but one of the problems is that teachers themselves share many of the common misconceptions about mindfulness. That it's just about sitting still with your eyes shut, that it's about emptying the mind, that it's a silver bullet. If you do this, all your problems go away. It's a solution to discipline problems and mental health problems. And there is a sense that possibly in which this seeing it as an intervention that you test as an outcome might be reinforcing this idea that it's a kind of bullet. Now, again, is this the model of mindfulness we want? In our work for the Mindfulness Initiative, we emphasize that mindfulness is a different way of relating to your experience. It's not a fix-all. It's not a simple solution. It's certainly not about emptying the mind. But that can be difficult to get across sometimes with brief training or with teachers who, and I was one myself, sometimes very much of the fix-it mentality. We want to see solutions, and therefore we tend to hone in on things as solutions. PSHE is often taught as solutions too. So that's possibly this is the mindset. But what really this showed very firmly is that the importance of teacher competence, that the young people taught by the teachers who were the most skilled practicing mindfulness learned the new skills more effectively. But they also concluded, as we can see, that preparing teachers is hard. And even though most became competent, only a minority were able to teach it really well. And again, I think this is really important. I was trained as an adult mindfulness teacher at the University of Exeter. I spent 2 years learning this skill and was tested many times before I was let loose on the general public to teach MBCT and MBSR. So are we expecting a lot really of our teachers to do this so quickly? Just to remind us that the teachers were themselves totally new to mindfulness, not selected from people who were interested. They have 4 days training. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Now, this I think is quite important. Their average score on a MBI TAC scale, which some of you may know, was 3 out of 6, at which level 1 is completely incompetent. Please don't think of teaching at all. Level 2 is all right, you need someone with you. Level 3 is advanced beginner, when you're just about ready to be let loose. But it would suggest to me that many would have fallen below that if that was the average. And as the Myriad team said, only a minority were able to teach it really well. The ones who would be falling below that level of competence were nevertheless included in the trial. And this is my personal question, really more than a mindfulness initiative question. Is that a fair test of SPMP? Would we do that in any other way? Do you think, and my question for you guys out there is, do you think that the teachers you come across routinely who are working through programs in a more normal kind of way are more skilled than that? I suspect that they are, because they're self-selected and so on. But that is a really important question for the field. Can we train teachers well enough to be competent? I think we can, and which is shown by the usually very positive results with young people's acceptability. So I think this question of how competent were teachers able to become during this is an important one. Okay, there was quite a lot also in Myriad about moving on from the individualized approach to looking at whole school approaches, and mental health is not just going to be solved by individualistic approaches, so we need to look at the whole system of the school. What I'd like to say, I suppose, to the whole field is we already know a huge amount from work on social and emotional learning and mental health and public health approaches in education to what a whole school approach means. And this is a model that I developed for the National Children's Bureau, just as an example of the kind of range of areas with which we need to start to integrate mindfulness. And Myriad indicates that, I think, but it's a complex business. And it's not easy to do. Just to glance your eyes around the screen, you can see there's a lot of different kind of things here. It's not just integrating with the curriculum. It's about with special needs, social and emotional skills, and most of all, the foundations of staff wellbeing and capacity, and making sure you do it well. We know that whole school approaches done badly can just be a diffuse mess. It needs to be done with clarity, cohesion, consistency. This is not easy work, and large whole school approaches can also fail if they're not done well. But this is, I think, where the field is going, and we found some good examples of whole school approaches in our guidance. This is another, I think, very, very important finding. Mindfulness improves school climate, and that's extremely difficult to do. It's very hard to influence school climate. And mindfulness training improved the climate compared with our comparison group, at least as described by the teachers. And as they said, a more positive school climate was associated with better mental health. So I think this was a really important finding. And I think this is a future direction for the field. How can mindfulness really start to integrate with the whole school climate and ethos, not just by learning meditation practice, but by encouraging schools to become more compassionate, more open-minded, to be more in the present, less driving towards the future. There's a whole cultural change here. So that's an interesting question, does mindfulness start to impact on school climate, and how? Is that your experience? So quickly through a few further conclusions and future directions. In the mindfulness initiative, we're really not just limiting what we're looking at all to mental health outcomes. And my colleague Jamie Bristow has written a really fabulous paper, Mindfulness Developing Agency in Urgent Times, in which he emphasizes the underlying capacities that studies of the inner person work that we're doing can develop, like, for example, compassion, like paying attention. As we know, what we pay attention to indicates the quality of our lives. Our own ability to self-regulate, our ability to engage in metacognition and to stand aside from our thoughts and our feelings and have space around them, and bringing all of this together into what you might call executive function or self-management. These are the kind of things that we're starting to look at, and many of the papers that I'm reviewing for various journals are starting to talk about educational work around mindfulness in these terms, not just about input, output, mental health outcome, tick box, questionnaire, just what capacities that actually influence everything about our lives and are about our relationships with ourselves and with other people. So this, I think, is a whole new agenda for the work we're doing. And we're suggesting that these kind of inner person approaches are foundational, relational and transformative. And it's hard to measure in this sort of RCT way, but nevertheless, this is what it feels like when it's going well in schools or in any other context that we may be involved in. Hard to measure sometimes, but really powerful stuff. Myriad found that school-based mindfulness training is subtle and complex. And I think we kind of knew that, and they suggest some of the ways in which it needs to be addressed on many fronts, like resources, misperceptions, supporting teachers. And maybe that it's only effective when all these conditions are in place. Yes, maybe it is. And that's what we find when we're trying to do whole school work. You can't itemize it into little boxes. It is a whole school, whole ethos, whole systems approach, which is what Myriad concluded. And again, I think these kind of conclusions of Myriad are not nearly well enough known. It's such interesting work, really. So I think that it's not just about individualistic interventions, as Myriad itself concluded in the end. We need to focus on what we know supports resilience in terms of policy, wider systems, education policies and school structures to shape the whole school climate. And the next generation of research needs to be about this kind of thing, supporting teachers' mental health, durable changes for teachers and for the wider school. Now, these are really important, really interesting findings. We're miles away from just, oh, it doesn't work, let's give up. This is really interesting conclusions, and I think we should all be very grateful to Myriad for moving on to this kind of area. So I just wanted to now just briefly sum up, I think, what I've been saying. I personally think that large-scale rollouts are not the way forward for the field. I've seen them fail so many times, not just in mindfulness, but in social and emotional learning, in health promotion, and so on. You have lovely work that's going really well with the right people in the right places, and you suddenly say, let's do it on a national scale. And it just falls flat on its face, and the press is terrible, and the whole field gets set back 10 years. It's not the way to go. And we mustn't let the research tail wag the dog. I'm all for evidence-based and controlled trials, but we need many kinds of research. And to be aware that however you assess this intervention, and whether you see it as an intervention or not, whatever you're doing, has an impact on what you're measuring. It's not neutral. What you've selected to evaluate it shapes what you find. So I would encourage us to work with those who want to work with us and to keep it small, local and flexible. Of course, develop the principles across all the work we do, but small is beautiful in this work. Must start with the staff, really important, and where the pupils are, and find out what makes them tick and what engages them. We don't know nearly enough about that. Move towards whole school approaches and systemic change, particularly focusing on this vital one of school climate and schools as places where you are and how you know how it feels when you walk through the door. Sometimes hard to measure, but very important. And I really would encourage all of us, and this is where we're going with the mindfulness initiative, to develop a much greater focus on educational processes and social processes, rather than keep reducing mindfulness to medical type models of interventions and outcomes. We need a much more subtle, systemic, relational approach. So final thought really is that Myriad suggested that we should also be looking at the big question, the pressures that particularly the secondary school system puts young people under. Maybe that's at the root of a lot of our mental health problems. There's a real big one that's well beyond mindfulness itself, but I often put this quote up because I'm so very fond of it. It was said by somebody I was working on in the book that I wrote with Thich Nhat Hanh, Happy Teachers Change the World. What he said, what we're really trying to do is make a school become a second family, where the teachers, the students, the whole school, the parents, it's a joint effort to create a place where it's not just about the future, just about your career, your job, your position, or your money, but a place to actually enjoy living and learning and enjoying exploring right now. And if I was describing what I think mindfulness in schools should be, it should be about the right now. What's it like to go to the school as a teacher, as a student, as a visitor, as a parent? Is it somewhere that fills your heart with joy and gives you a feeling that you matter, and so on? Because we bang on all the time, particularly in secondary schools, about results and exams and where are you going. And it's the antithesis of what we should be doing, just making sure that the school is right now a place which is worth being in. And I think it's interesting that in a way Myriad came to that conclusion that it's the pressures that we're putting people under, and we need to do something about that. So I think that involves a real big systemic change. So that's really all I've got to say. I can stop sharing screen now. Stop share. Sorry if I rattled through it a bit, but I thought if I gave us a bit of a framework, that would give us something to get our teeth into a bit. So thank you, anyone who's left, for listening.
Right, let's remove the spotlight if we can. Okay. Yes, will we get a copy of the PowerPoint, Katherine? Yep. Okay, so we'll make sure that that's available in some way through Mindfulness World. We'll send out a link after the session. So thank you so much. Look, my suggestion, there was so much in that. It was really rich, really important material. I'm going to suggest that we have breakout rooms to give us 10 minutes or so with one or two other people, just to absorb and to see if we can formulate what our questions are. Some of you I know are very familiar with this material, others probably quite new to it, but there was so much in that, and Katherine asked us so many questions, that perhaps we can take a little bit of time to reflect in pairs or threes. So, right, 33 participants. Let's have 11 breakout rooms, which will be 3, but it's possible that not everyone who's actually on the call is active. So let's see how that works. If you find yourself on your own in a breakout room, please send a direct message to me, and I'll try and rearrange the breakout rooms. So that's everyone is going to be going into breakout room, including the trustees and Katherine and so on. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can always stay here.
The only reason for me not to be part of it is it might skew a particular group.
Yes, well, don't join that group then. Don't accept the invitation to join.
Okay.
Okay, and
right
there will, and I know that some of you won't be able to stay for this part of the session. Thank you so much for joining us, if that is your position. Let's just see how it goes. Okay, welcome back to everyone. I hope you had a fruitful conversation with either one or two other people. I hope that's been an opportunity to absorb some of the material that Katherine shared with us. And now what I'm going to invite you to do is to, I think what would be good now is if we can have a discussion where we can have questions, and on the whole, those would be directed to Katherine. But it could be that you actually want to say something that isn't a question. You've got something of your own that you want to share. So use the chat, please, to comment in that way, and we'll see if we can manage the discussion in that way. So just reflecting on what you would like to ask now. And, you know, we've got people who are very experienced in this field. And please, if you are one of the experienced people, don't feel that that means you can't speak because you wear a rather large hat in this conversation. That's all the more reason to contribute. And if no one puts anything in the chat, I'm going to pick on one or two of the people I've asked to do this previously. Ah, here we go. Here we go. Okay, so let's start with Tim's question. Tim, just going to spotlight you for a moment. There you go. I hope this is all right. And do you have a question about the school community? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I've also just been at the very same time as answering that question, quickly making a note of something that a lovely colleague on the call has reminded me about that needed to be done. So I'm fully with you all now. So yeah, I was really interested to hear the significance of school community that came through from Myriad, but also the potential that mindfulness has to inform across the school community. I'm just wondering if we're looking at best use of resources and best use of time in schools, whether our traditional ways of working with schools, so 8-week course for staff and 8 to 10 sessions with kids, could that be involved, to speak more specifically to a school community? Is the way it could be evolved to make more of this potential, given that mindfulness is a little bit formulaic, isn't it, in how traditionally it's taught in schools?
Okay, good, thank you. So I'm going to spotlight Katherine as well. Okay. And be great to hear from you, Katherine. I'd also like to include someone from MISP. So either Ben or Richard, perhaps you can let me know if you'd be willing to comment after Katherine's had some say. Yeah, you're happy to say something, Ben? Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay. Right. Well, what in our implementation guidance, which we did for the Mindfulness Initiative, there's quite a long set of chapters around implementing this in schools, which really cover in some detail what you're talking about, and not just as a theory, but as actually finding out what works in schools. And I think it's about moving beyond mindfulness as an 8-week intervention. I mean, that needs to be there. People do need to know what you're talking about. And if you don't have anything solid there, it's just water on sand. But it's a lot more to do with working with leadership particularly. And if you can get the leaders on board, you do start to influence the ethos of the school. And you get out of the idea that, as I was saying, that mindfulness is just sitting on your bottom and following your breath for 20 minutes. And it starts to be about the attitudinal qualities that mindfulness has. So bringing open-mindedness and curiosity and kindness to, for example, the behavior management policies in the school, getting behind the superficial behavior, understanding what makes the young people tick and so on, developing ways of being, between the staff and their way of being with one another and their relationships and with the parents. This is quite deep attitudinal shift stuff. And it is best done, I think, by having school leaders who practice what they preach, who actually have their own practice. It doesn't have to be 40 minutes every morning. I mean, that's lovely if it is, but who regularly practice and keep this up, and who are therefore able to understand this at a deep inner level, and therefore to see how it impacts on relationships and connection and so on. It's a long-term work in progress, but we are seeing it starting to happen, and I think that really is where it needs to go. So it becomes part of the whole ethos of the school. It's not just about short meditation practices, it's about the whole way of being. And we've got quite a few examples and case studies in the implementation guidance. And I wrote a book called Happy Teachers Change the World, which is very much about how teachers took this back to their school and developed this work themselves in a grassroots upwards kind of way. So that's an interesting a companion piece really to the idea of mindfulness as an intervention. It's a grassroots approach as opposed to this is what you do formulaic approach. So I don't know whether that helps, Tim.
Yeah, maybe does that help, Tim?
Well, for sure. I mean, it points towards another one of the several questions I'd prepared.
But maybe let Ben have a say on that first question, because you have quite a hands-on engagement with this sort of question. We were just talking about it in a breakout room.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, my mind has gone off in multiple directions now listening to Katherine speak. So I think there's two things I want to share. One, I think Katherine made this, well, definitely implied it, but the benefit in a school community of having staff members who are practicing some form of mindfulness, it's just huge. Never mind the delivery models and all the fine details. Anecdote around that, and it's not actually mindfulness, it's one of my yoga practice pre-mindfulness, but my class knew, and Tim's probably heard this story before, but my class knew that I did that every morning, and one day I didn't, and I went in, and Georgia in my class just piped up, "Mr. Chowie, did you do your yoga practice this morning?" So no, George, yeah, we can tell the difference. So that for me was huge with, okay, so if we're actually practicing this ourselves in whatever form, ideally I think an 8-week course personally, just because of learning, but it's not the only way in. So I think it's interesting to explore different ways in. And then, Tim's point about the 10-week.B course or sort of 12-week course is valid, and there's more than one way of doing this. And I know Tim's aware of DOTS, so I couldn't resist the background change there. But we developed a program for 3 to 6 year olds. It's not going to work with 3 to 6 year olds if you're sitting there for 45 minutes. So it needed to be little and often, in sort of 10-20-minute sessions, practices that were actually acknowledging, well, one, the egocentricity of many children that age, but also the stillness is not something that's going to come completely naturally. So more of a little and often approach, 10-20 minutes a week, and then embedding that throughout the school week. And that's really certainly within particularly myself and Faye, who's also here with conversations about just developing alternative approaches that might support as well. And really linking back to Myriad, allowing a bit more input maybe from the students' co-creation in the direction they take. So a bit more flexibility. So personally, I think it's quite exciting, the potential to not throw out the way that things have historically been done, because they certainly have validity, but to mutate and give permission and to have perhaps greater flexibility, which actually was always there in .B. I mean, I'm from a primary background, you know, fun, humour and pushing edges has been part of my own practice. Speaking to Richard, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying, that was very much part of how .B was developed. You know, it was a little bit countercultural, new and fun. And sometimes maybe we've moved away from that. So reintroducing all of that, I'm definitely all for. So I'm getting giggles because Tim and I were on retreat earlier in the year and we laugh a lot. So I will mute myself now.
Okay. I suggest we move on to another question. There's quite a lot of questions in the chat. There's no way we're going to get through them all. So if I remove, sorry, Tim, you're gone. And I'd quite like to go to Matt Wilkinson. Let's see if I can. Now, it's partly because this is quite a simple question in a way. Now, Matt, if you're there, I'm going to spotlight you now. And there you go. You're on the spot. Yeah, so Matt, would you like to ask your question, which I take it is from someone who's relatively new to this whole field, which I think is an important voice to have.
Thank you very much, and even everyone. I'm not quite new to the field. In my question in the chat, I've only been in the school for 3 weeks, but I had a very good chat with Richard at the parliamentary inquest 2 months ago.
Inquest?
Yeah, well, not inquest, but inquiry, sorry. Yeah, change my words properly there, about mindfulness in schools, because I'm in the process, a nice chat with Faye, thank you very much, Faye, about, because I'm just leaving the military now and I've just joined a school. So I've been quite involved for the last 2 years with the military side of mindfulness and how it's hopefully trying to be integrated into the basic training system. But Faye and I had a really good chat, and one of the things that we both talked about is following off the delivery of their 8, 10, 12-week program, is there some sort of flowchart template that they could adapt to keep the momentum with the staff and the pupils that's just had that delivery to them to then take it forward? Okay, and that's where my apologies was, because I've only been in school for 3 weeks, so I'm a little bit like not sure what's going on.
That's fine, Matt. No, I think it's good because it's quite a general question, and maybe if we relate it to Myriad, you know, what is the advice for schools wanting to develop, wanting to bring in mindfulness programs? Interested to hear what you have to say, Katherine. And yeah, so someone in Matt's position or anyone in a school who's wanting to look at mindfulness in schools, where are we now?
Well, I guess it's something on which Myriad only simply recommends that this should happen. I mean, it was well beyond the scope of their project, their research to actually do. I think what they did was to recognise the lack, you know, and the limitations of an 8 or 10 week program, that you just come and go, and that this was really water on sand. Although something I was just talking to somebody in a group about, that before we launch into what next in terms of systems and templates, is never underestimate the long-term impact of just having done the course, even if you don't practice it. I was saying to one of the other people on this call that some things are real. Once you've walked through the door, you don't walk back. Once you walk through the door that thoughts are not facts, you have got it. You know, you have space around your thoughts. Once you walk through the door of emotions can well up and then go, you're not the same impulsive person that you were before. So even if you don't do the meditation practice, there have been shifts that are important to keep up. So I think we should recognise that and value that. But certainly, I think what the world of mindfulness is now doing is finding ways to continue and consolidate that work. You know, there's been suggestions on chat, various books and programs. Maggie Farah's program, I mentioned the one that I did with Plum Village. These are all. There's a whole kind of industry you might call after the 8 week course what ? In all the fields we're engaged in. and how do we help people to keep this going? Now, I don't think there can be one template or one flowchart. I think that would actually be against the spirit of the thing. I think the idea is to internalize it and then to find ways as a person, as a group, as a collection of staff, as a school, as a community, to internalize the principles of mindfulness and to find your own ways to keep this going. So I think it won't just happen, but it does help to be with others, to form a group and to reinforce one another. And many of the good programs, including MISP, do have structured further training on leadership and so on. So engaging in that's important. But after a while, you've got to take off the water wings, and really internalize this and work with people. And it's work. It's a journey, just to use the terrible cliche. I think that's all I need to say there. But Ben, did you have a view?
Just thinking it might be a pertinent point to bring Faye in, if that's okay. I'll switch myself out with Faye. She's looking like.
Okay. All right. So
because, yeah, I can do it. It's okay. I'll take myself out for a moment.
All right. So I'll remove your spotlight, Ben.
Sorry to drop you in it, Faye.
Yeah, just been dropped in it. That's it.
Well, would you just like introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, so I'm Faye Rushton. I've been working as a trainer for the Mindfulness in Schools project since 2015. And my current role is Pathways Manager with the Mindfulness in Schools project. And this is exactly what we're exploring, is how do we support teachers, support schools, post-training in developing community. So I really agree with everything you were saying there, Katherine, about, for me, it's very much about how do we help people stay connected, to each other in practice. And I know that we've got some teachers here who are doing just that in the school settings that they're in at the moment, is actually sort of like working to have that community together, but also offering sort of post-training support as well. So opportunities to explore some of the things that come up when teachers then begin offering it to young people or to each other, if they're offering it to their peers as well in school settings. So this is our big exploration right now, and hopefully over the next year, it's already begun. There's lots and lots of support for people after they've trained, and they're beginning to do this work. But more is coming as well in the pipeline with regards to that.
Okay, good, thank you. Is that it? Should we move on, Matt? Okay, I'll remove your spotlight. Faye, should I keep you there just for the next one? We'll see if it's relevant. Hamish, you have a question. Let me see if I can spotlight you there, Hamish. Hamish may have left since he asked.
I'm here.
Ah, okay.
I'm
good,
just
good, good.
Hello there. Hello.
Let me just spotlight you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Oh, well done. Someone else has done it. Good, thank you.
I think Faye may have partly addressed the question. I quite recently trained in the .B foundations to teach my colleagues, and I recently taught 6 colleagues in my own school and have set up a sort of a weekly sit. But just based on what Katherine was saying, teacher competence seems to be a major opportunity stroke barrier to the mindfulness being successfully adopted, both with young people and with colleagues in schools. And just, I think what Faye has intimated about what MISP are doing is fantastic, but maybe more broadly than that, have anyone got any ideas about how teacher competence can be supported going forward, if that's such a major pillar as we go forward?
Yeah, so just to comment on that, I think we're not trying to turn out people as clones or robots. There isn't one way to teach mindfulness or to be mindful. It needs to travel through the basis of the teacher's own authenticity, their personality, how they do it. So there's many, many ways. I think without a doubt, it starts from the teachers themselves believing that this is helpful for themselves and doing practice of some kind. It doesn't necessarily have to be lots of sitting practice. It might be walking practice, it might be through creativity, it might be combining with compassion, it might be through yoga. You know, there's other ways to do this, but it is about being present, kind, compassionate, open-minded, on purpose. You know, dear old John Kabat-Zinn. So, and without that, you're not going to be able to do that. If you think it's a fix-it, if you think it's something that other people should do because it's good for them, but you've lost the practice yourself, those are the two big areas. And I suspect that teachers who are not very good at teaching it, they're probably great at teaching all the other things. They're not bad people. They just haven't really internalized what mindfulness can do in terms of particularly being with your experience as it is. And I think this is so important for this work we're trying to do on mental health with young people. It's not about fixing young people. It's about listening to young people and understanding what they're going through and actually being present with them in their sadness and their suffering. And also, of course, in their joy and their excitement. I don't think it's all dismal. But really being present with young people is, for me, the essence of this. And if you can get that right, then you have the competence. And if you don't get that right, if you keep leaping on to what they're supposed to do with it or what the answer is, and so on, you've lost it. And that's almost the essence to me of what being competent is. And something else I will emphasize, because I know Richard Burnett would be keen I do, is that you do have to do it authentically and make it fun. And the fun can take many different ways. You don't have to put silly hats on and blow whistles, but you have to do it from a position of lightness and kindness about yourself and your own limitations and their limitations, and be able to have a laugh about this, not take it too seriously. It goes through the filter of your own skills as a teacher in the classroom. You know, you need to be pretty good in the classroom in the first place, but it does have this extra dimension which not all teachers get, of being with things as they are, not as you would like them to be when everybody's changed. And that's so important, and that's the one that keeps getting lost for people in my experience.
That's really interesting, isn't it? It really shows the challenge, because that's not like teaching maths.
No.
You know? Faye or Richard, Faye or Ben, any comments?
There is a comment, actually, as you just say about teaching maths that sparked it.
Yeah.
Even teaching maths takes time.
Even teaching maths.
You know, I mean, I don't think there's anybody I've ever taught maths to on screen, but it took me a little while to get to grips with that as a teacher, to find ways. And I think, you know, Myriad, to refer back to the kind of focal point, was assessing people quite early in their time with this. And I think, you know, Liz and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Liz, from a conference point of view, but in that we happened to be in the same breakout room, we were saying it took us a little while to get to grips with delivering mindfulness in the classroom. So to go back to Hamish's bit, you know, there is a time aspect, you know, and it is different from the norm for a lot of people in their teaching style, but teaching anything takes time to develop competency. And I think, I mean, Christopher Pan and I were talking earlier today, Mark Williams, I can't remember when the MISP conference was, but spoke about mindfulness happening in horticultural time and not clock time, you know, not picking it up all the time to measure it, you know, not being sure when things are actually going to germinate and grow. And I think there's a bit like that with competency of teaching mindfulness. Even if you're a top-notch classroom teacher, it does take time to develop it. So I don't know, Faye, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, just similarly, it made me think about the fact that actually as well, you kind of need to know things sort of inside out, really, from having delivered it a few times to then feel like you can go off-piste. So there's something about just being true to the intentions of what you're offering. And then at the same time playing with that, making it relevant to the young people that you've got in front of you so that they can kind of hook into it. But I don't think you have that confidence straight away. I think that's something that kind of develops over time. So even though we mission give clearly about kind of making it relevant and light, maybe people don't feel like that when they first deliver it. So there's something about just time and experience and having a couple of goes before you feel you can do that.
Okay.
I think just to add, I think the notion of cultivation is one that I'm increasingly interested in. It isn't something that you just do to people. It's something. The horticultural metaphor is really important. It just does take time. It grows. It's a process. And one of the biggest barriers is people try and rush it and who try to have striving attached to it. And it's, again, particularly in secondary schools, it's so difficult sometimes to have this different ethos around what we're trying to do. But on the other hand, so vital, because that is where, as Myriad put their finger on, kids are struggling in schools. It's not just social media, it's not just the world outside the school. It's the school itself and the pressure that we're putting them under. So having a bit of space in a day where you can get things wrong and you can say you're bored and someone says, oh, that's interesting, what's feeling bored like? It's just transformative, really. But it can only be done in its own time, in its own way. You can't just do it to people.
Okay, so I'll remove spotlight from Hamish. Now, could someone spotlight Stella? That's S. Gunningham. I don't seem to be able to do it myself. There you go, Stella. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
I thought you had a question which might follow on. Faye and Ben, are you happy to stay spotlighted? Okay. Yes, please ask your question, Stella.
I suppose my school at the moment are looking at educational strategies a lot, and I'm in the early stages of convincing them to do a lot of the mindfulness, the .B things, which I am trained in. I've only taught it halfway through myself in my last school, and then COVID hit, so I don't have that confidence yet that you're talking about. So it's something I know I need to develop. But I'm trying to tie it into metacognition, because that's a big thing on the Welsh, kind of the new Welsh curriculum. Metacognition is kind of a big key area there as well. So it's kind of like, how can you see kind of introspection, mindfulness, and metacognition moving forward, I guess? Have you got any tips or hints on how I could kind of move that forward in the classroom?
Yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about. I mean, the wider whole field that we're looking at, you might call something like contemplative education rather than mindfulness. And contemplative, although it's a word that sounds a bit dull, is about developing the whole inner person, really, in all their capacities. And I referred to it in the slide, and I was saying that this is what we're kind of aiming at now, and metacognition being part of that. So the broader field, really, of how do we develop our own capacity to relate to our experience, of which metacognition is one part. And I think if you're thinking about how do you relate mindfulness to that, it might be very helpful to think, well, what can mindfulness add to metacognition? And I think what it adds is this embodied sense of it as a practice, not just as a theory, not just as a sort of tick box. So, for example, getting your kids to do a .B before you do a metacognition exercise. It could be a very short one. It could be 2 minutes long, of just taking or sounding a bell or a noise, if that's what you're allowed to do in your school, and just get them, rather than rush into the metacognitive exercise you want them to do, to just stop, to reflect on what's happening inside, what's the breath doing, where's the mind gone, what thoughts are here, what emotions are here. Just that centering back to the person. And you can do that through lots of tiny little practices. So mindfulness is above all a practice, not a theory. Metacognition, and I've been involved in teaching it, can sometimes wander off into the world of theory and intellectualizing, even though it's supposedly about thoughts and not fact. So I would combine really simple mindfulness practice with whatever metacognition exercise you're going to do. Don't call it mindfulness necessarily. Let's just say, let's arrive a bit more. Let's just take an inner selfie. What's going on inside ourselves? Let's just be a bit more, present for ourselves. But I think the two streams go brilliantly together. It's happening a lot in higher education under the title of contemplative pedagogy or contemplative education, where university students are encouraged to combine their intellectual studies with their mindfulness practice. And Orinogus calls it mindfulness as education, not mindfulness in education. And it's so powerful that we stop thinking of mindfulness as something we're doing to people to stop them being depressed. And we start saying this is part and parcel of the whole way that we're doing teaching and learning. So integrating it into the classroom is very possible. And if you already know these practices, then just throw a few in briefly.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you.
So Katherine, you're really taking us a long way away from the idea of an intervention that is rolled out through the system and so on. I just want to ask Liz Williams if you, because Stella just asked about the Welsh context, if you had any comments about or any of this in relation to Wales with our new curriculum, which some people may not know about. And I also find, before you do that, I'll just mention the time. This will be a final comment, I think, and then we'll wrap up.
Oh, just to say that I've made a mental note of Stella's question there, and making contact with Faye there, because Faye and I are doing some work to build on what Miss Faye has already done for Miss on mapping the curriculum against the requirements for England. And mapping for Wales isn't the right word. And what you've made me think about there is saying, actually, we need to call it something else. So picking out the opportunities that you've just talked about, we've got a new health and wellbeing curriculum. We've got a new curriculum that has purposes that are all about the inner person. And I think there's room for us to have a look at Catherine's collective list of things that you need to work on for the inner person. And to pick up what you just talked about in terms of metacognition, Stella. And I think we've made the job harder, Faye, here, I think. But I think there is something that's not mapping that means we can pick it up for Wales and do some describing about how it might be used. That maybe there's more about how it might be used. That I think would also be useful elsewhere there. But I think you might just have changed a little bit of the direction of what we can do for Wales there. So made a mental note to come back to you on that, Stella.
Thank you.
Just follow that up, and let's see if quite what and how we might be able to work it out, so that we can give some examples about how the really important things that are the key, the buzzwords, if you like, and it shouldn't be that, but we can use this, I think, to take it forward in Wales. So there's some really exciting thoughts I'm having. I don't quite know where they're going to go yet. We'll come back to you on that one, but some exciting thoughts that we can have. Faye's looking excited as well. I'm glad about that. We'll take that forward.
Okay, so it's 28 minutes past. I think I'm going to remove everyone's spotlight and just come back to the group. It might be a relief to no longer be spotlighted. I'll leave my spotlight on because I just want to thank Katherine again, to thank everyone else who's contributed for such a rich discussion. I think we really have moved a long way beyond the reporting of Myriad, that there's this intervention and does it work, does it not work, not good results, etc., to a much more considered place on how can we considered account of how we can make schools more mindful, how we can bring mindfulness into the lives of our young people. So thanks again. If you would like to make a donation to help us with the costs of Mindfulness Wales, or if you'd like to see our future events and our Zoom program, then go to mindfulnesswales.org, mindfulness-wales.org, and you'll find all of the information there. In the new year, we have Becca Crane, Director of the Centre for Mindfulness Research and Practice, coming in March, and we have Mark Williams coming not long after that. So I think it simply remains for me to thank everyone and wish you well until the new year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bishop Annie. Bye-bye, everyone.
Remove my spotlight now. Okay. Remove spotlight.